what's going on between Iran and the United States. And the situation is getting so critical in the West Asia because Saudi Arabia is somehow escalating or making new fronts for itself. They started the attacks on Yemen, then we see the attacks on Iraq together with the United States. And yesterday there was a funeral in Iraq. Those people who were assassinated by these attacks, and Donald Trump said that he was coordinating the attack with the prime minister of Iraq, which put him in a fragile position. After all, he visited the United States. And we had Iranian attack on Jordan for the first time without being attacked. Iran is attacking Jordan and at the same time attacking the Iraqi Kurdistan. This is what's going on. Then the United States responded last night. They attacked southern part of Iran. They used HIMARS to attack the western part of Iran, in the province of Khuzestan. But I would say most of these attacks were done using HIMARS and ATACMS, and in the western part of Iran. Here is what we are today. And looking at the situation, the way that you see the war, what do you find of the conflict? I lost your picture, Alex. Yeah, you're back.
It's my phone. I'm sorry.
Yeah. How do you find the situation right now in the West Asia? Somehow the war is expanding.
I think, Nima, maybe I'll sound like a broken record, but I think that the logic of this conflict is such that Iran has every reason to push forward towards a military victory. What does that mean? That means evicting the United States and Great Britain and their allies from the region, and probably removing Israel from the region. And I think that there are many voices in Iran which are actually stating as much explicitly by this point. They have an upper hand. I think that getting back to negotiations is something that the Iranians have to do because they do need the support and alliance of other countries like Pakistan, like China, like Russia, and so on. And all these countries, I think, are wary of the economic destabilization that is going to result from this conflict. But from the strictly military strategic point of view, Iran has an upper hand. And I think that by pursuing the military solution every day, they're inflicting damage on US, British, Israeli alliance that is very, very difficult for them to recover from. We have to remember that there's a logistical aspect to everything. So every piece of equipment, every facility that the Israelis or the Americans blow up, well, okay, so Israelis are now apparently not participating, except maybe they are. Every piece of equipment or facility that they destroy in Iran, the Iranians can relatively easily recover from. They can repair it, they can rebuild it, they can replace it with other facilities and weapons. Everything that the Iranians destroy in the region, American ships or aircraft or radar stations on their bases, is difficult for the Americans to recover because they are on the wrong side of the planet. Their supply lines are thousands of miles long, and everything that needs to be replaced has to be brought from United States or Western Europe. And so it's the Iranians have the home front advantage, and they certainly have the escalatory dominance. And from that point of view, they would really be wasting a historical opportunity if they didn't take as much advantage of that as possible. And then, from time to time, there's going to be talks. They're going to be mediated. But I think that the Iranians know very well by now that even if Donald Trump signs an agreement in black and white and in public, that it's not worth the ink that he uses to sign it. So, the Americans have proven this time and time again, not just with Iranians, but negotiating Minsk 1 with the Russians, Minsk 2, negotiating, the commitment not to expand NATO eastwards. Like if they were willing to be so brazen against Russia, which is a nuclear superpower, what would make anybody think that they would honor their word and their commitment to Iran at all? So I think that the Iranians perfectly understand that. Now, I would imagine that the Saudis understand this as well. And I would imagine that the Gulf kingdoms know it as well. I don't, so, this is why I'm looking at this escalation where the Saudis attack Yemen and then they attack Iraq. And I have to wonder whether Saudis are in the loop at all. Whether this isn't Israeli, American, British false flags that then get attributed to the Saudis in order to preempt any kind of peaceful settlement between Iran and other Gulf kingdoms, because from Iran's point of view, it's better not to fight everybody all at the same time. So if they can have a constructive relationship with the Saudis to tell them, fine, we know you're caught in a trap. We know you can't evict the Americans or the British from your military bases. We will strike at their bases, but we will try to avoid inflicting damage on your energy facilities, on your infrastructure, and so forth. But I think that it's in the Americans' interest and in the Israeli interest to unite the whole region against Iran. So to make sure that the Saudis have no choice but to fight the war on the side of United States and Iran. So I wonder who made these silly decisions to attack Yemen, because that is just, it was completely unnecessary. The bombing of Sana'a was completely unnecessary. I don't see what objective it would achieve. They were supposedly reinforcing their air and maritime embargo on Yemen. But what's the point? It was an Iranian plane who came there for a particular occasion. So I'm very suspicious about this, because it seems incredibly stupid to do that. And then, of course, the Yemenis, who have a massive axe to grind against the Saudis, because the Saudis were waging this extremely brutal, extremely ruthless war against Yemen for 7 years between 2015 and 2022. This war ended effectively, but it never ended formally. There was no peace sign. There was no peace treaty or truce or anything. So, at that point, they just gave the Yemenis a green light to respond and to inflict very heavy damage on the Saudis and to open a completely new war front. Saudis don't have the ability to fight a war on one front, let alone two fronts. They tried to destroy Ansar Allah for 7 years. They ran 25,000 bombing raids. They imposed air embargo, maritime embargo, which resulted in, well, the whole war resulted in almost 400,000 casualties, but 60% of those was the result of the embargo, the famine and disease, and they still could not achieve any of their strategic objectives. So why would they start this now, when they know that the Ansar Allah not only survived the war from 2015 to 2022, they are now much more powerful than they were when Saudis were attacking them. And they know that the first thing that the Ansar Allah will do is close the Strait of Bab el Mandeb, right? And effectively bring Saudi oil export to zero. They still have the Suez route, but Suez Canal, you cannot run very large crude carriers through Suez Canal. You have the so-called Suez Max um, vessels, which I think are about half, if half the size of a very large crude carrier. I think up to 150,000 tons. If I'm not mistaken, don't quote me on that. So it was an extraordinarily stupid thing to do. All their facilities, all their oil facilities, their pipelines are within reach of Houthi drones and missiles. So I honestly suspect that Saudis were out of the loop, and that these bombing raids were decided by, I don't know, CENTCOM, Mossad, MI6, who knows? They were ran from Saudi Arabia. Maybe maybe Saudi officials pulled the trigger, but they didn't. If it's MBS who's calling the shots, I would be surprised, because it's just too much of a mission suicide.
When they said that the United States, together with Saudi Arabia, attacked Iraq, I was somehow suspicious about if the United States would do that together with Saudi Arabia. It's difficult, to do such, because you have to train, you have to get prepared before that. It's not just getting out and saying, "Let's go out, Alex. You go with your car, I go with my car." It's not like this. This is the
Yes.
operation. It's not. That's why I'm so. I don't know if it was all Saudi Arabia going and attacking Iraq, or the United States without Saudi Arabia.
I would expect as much, Nima. And I hate that the United Kingdom never gets an honorable mention in all these analyses, but the British have a very, very prominent role, not just in Israel, but also in Saudi Arabia. And the British were the primary enablers of the Saudi war against Yemen from 2015 to 2022. They were the main moving force and the main enabler and supporter with how do you call it, spare parts and armaments and the maintenance of Saudi aircraft. I think that the BAE company, the British aerospace company, the military industrial contractor, they had something like 6,000 mechanics and engineers in Saudi Arabia during that war in order to support Saudi effort. And without them, the Saudis couldn't maintain that war for even a few weeks, because all this military machinery requires a fairly heavy maintenance. And a lot of hate gets directed to the United States and Trump, but they are just cogs in this machine. And the British are very, very prominently involved. They just keep it quiet, and the media never mention them. And most military and strategic analysts never mention them, but they are there. And so these decisions could have been taken by the Americans, they could have been taken by the British, it could have been taken by elements of CENTCOM connected with the CIA and with, how do you call it, MI6 and the Mossad. Didn't it just emerge that one prominent Israeli person in the United States, the name just escapes me now, was almost in daily contact with General Cooper, who is the head of CENTCOM. So the headlines will say like, "Oh, Saudis did this." Maybe it wasn't exactly Saudis, or maybe we need specifics. Which Saudis exactly, and how did they make the decision? Was MBS in the loop? How did all this happen exactly? The again, the risk benefit analysis from the point of view of MBS, of Saudi Arabia as a kingdom, is so skewed in favor of risk that I suspect that this is some form of a false flag, and that decisions were taken elsewhere.
Yeah, I assume there's something going on behind the scene that we don't know. You mentioned how important is the communication between Iran and other GCC countries, and we know that yesterday, after more than 3 weeks, we had the first Qatari LNG ship passing through the Strait of Hormuz and using the Iranian route, the part of Iran, because the southern route is not working. So it means that they're communicating, they're talking to each other, at least Iran and Qatar. This is what's going on. And the problem is, Alex, right now is the war is somehow expanding. And I don't see anything good coming out of this for the United States. For example, if they're short of ammunition, if they're short of interceptors, why do they need to expand the war? And with that concept, it seems to me you've mentioned Russia, Iran, and these two countries are in a Russia has been in this war for more than 4 years, and next February we're gonna hit the 5 years of the war in Ukraine, which is a war
Yeah.
of attrition. This is not something new for Russia. Russia knows the reality of this war, and Iran is learning, in my opinion. And because the time you've mentioned the necessity of having negotiations with the United States, but how is that possible? Russia tried that over and over with the two administrations, with the Biden administration, and right now with the Trump administration, which was supposed to put an end to the war in 24 hours. That didn't happen. And I think Iran is on the same path. And as time goes by, they're going to learn that it's impossible to talk with the Trump administration.
It's well, not that it's impossible, Nima, but I think it's useless in the sense of gaining any direct benefit, de-escalation, commitment, or anything like that. I think it's nevertheless always useful to talk to the other side, because you can always exchange information. You can always um, prevent unintended escalations from taking place. Escalations that might take place by misunderstanding or just mistakes, when somebody fires off some kind of a weapon, because maybe they saw something on the radar, but it wasn't a real thing, or uh, and then in the long term, you always want to have interlocutors that you can have an understanding with, that you can, because every war, ultimately every single war, it doesn't matter how much people might hate each other at a given moment, every war always ends up at a negotiating table. Some kind of a truce, some kind of a peace treaty has to be signed. And so you do want to cultivate those relationships regardless. But I think that nobody has any illusions anymore that the United States, or it's not just the United States, it's this whole Western system. They are essentially incapable of honoring any commitment, because they will make the commitment in order to obtain some immediate concession. But as soon as it's expedient for them to break their commitment, they will, absolutely. And it's not just, oh, we will not, like, if you withdraw from Eastern Germany, we will not move NATO 1 inch to the east. And then they add, they go 1,400 kilometers to the east. Minsk 1 accord with Russia, Minsk 2. How many times did they start negotiations and they then killed the the negotiators, their counterparts. It's kind of a tradition because the United States made, I think, about 400 treaties with the Native Americans, the people we still call Indians, and they broke every single one of them. So this system has a certain nature. It's perfidious. It's completely unreliable. It's ruthless, and it only recognizes the language of force. So ultimately, you have to build your strategic position by force. But while you do that, you're still going to be talking to them. You have to. That's just the nature of these conflicts. They have to end someday. And so I think that at this time, nobody has any illusions about how useful the talks are. They will not cause the United States to back down. They will not cause anybody in this Western alliance to honor their commitments. But nevertheless, you have to have the diplomatic relations, because you're going to have trade relations, because you're going to have cultural relations and sports. And so you can't, let's say that you would want to avoid breaking the world off into autarkic blocks, like North Korea for a time, or Albania, that had completely, sealed its borders and had virtually no diplomatic relations with anybody. People were forbidden to travel. All channels of communications were broken off. You could not see foreign televisions in Albania. You could not have a passport, and on and on. So I think that you probably want to avoid this. So the communications and the contacts are going to continue, and you want to cultivate them, at least to have as much understanding, as much exchange of information as possible, without expecting that the conflict will be resolved through diplomatic means. That's probably not going to happen.